She tried to charge me rent for my own guest room in my own house. Then she moved her mother in without asking, 72 days, no lease, no permission, just entitlement and a key she copied herself. The eviction notice hit her mailbox on a Tuesday. By Friday, she was begging the HOA board to intervene. They couldn't. Turns out residential squatting laws run both directions. Want to know what I did? Keep watching. Drop your state in the comments because property rights look different everywhere and this story gets wild. Before I tell you how I legally evicted an HOA board member's relative from my own guest room, you need to understand who I'm dealing with and how this even started. My name is Nathan Cross. I'm 48, civil engineer, divorced 3 years, no kids, one dog named Biscuit who has better judgment than most people I know. I live in a 2-story colonial in Ridgemont Park, a planned community outside Raleigh, North Carolina. 142 homes, 2 retention ponds, 1 clubhouse that smells like chlorine and regret, and an HOA that operates like a small authoritarian state. My house has 4 bedrooms. I use one. The second is my home office. The third stores camping gear and boxes I haven't opened since the divorce. The fourth is the guest room. Clean sheets, decent mattress, neutral paint, the kind of space you keep ready for the friend who visits twice a year or the family member passing through. It sat empty 11 months out of 12. That was fine. I'm not running a bed and breakfast. I'm maintaining a home. The HOA president is a woman named Diane Kellerman. 63 years old, retired HR director from a pharmaceutical company, drives a silver Lexus sedan she washes every Sunday like clockwork. She wears cardigans in July. Cardigans. Her hair is always the same, short-styled, immovable, the kind of hair that suggests she has a standing appointment and a stylist who knows not to make small talk. Diane doesn't have hobbies, she has jurisdiction, her entire personality is governance. She's been board president for 6 years, the other 4 board members vote however she indicates. I've watched it happen. She'll nod slightly and they'll all raise their hands like synchronized swimmers. It's impressive in a deeply unsettling way. Now, Diane's mother is a woman named Lorraine Kellerman. 81 years old, mobile, sharp, perfectly capable of independent living, but apparently in need of temporary housing while her condo underwent what Diane described as emergency mold remediation. That's important. Emergency. Temporary. I'm going to come back to those words. 3 months before the guest room situation, I had a small issue with the HOA. My fence needed a board replaced. One board, I replaced it myself on a Saturday. Used the same stain, same height, same everything. 2 days later, I got a violation notice, unapproved exterior modification. The fence board didn't match the exact weathered tone of the 13-year-old boards around it because it was new. I was fined $75 and required to submit a remediation plan. I paid the fine. I submitted a plan that said the board would weather naturally within 6 months. It did. But I wrote the date in a notebook. Small green notebook, dollar store, nothing fancy. I wrote the date, the fine amount, and the words exterior modification, one board. I didn't know why I was writing it down, just instinct. Turns out instinct was correct. 4 weeks later, Diane knocked on my door. Sunday afternoon, wearing a cardigan despite it being 82 degrees outside. She was holding a bakery box, the kind with the clear plastic window, cookies inside, store-bought price sticker still visible. She needed a favor, small favor, temporary situation. Her mother Lorraine needed a place to stay for 2 weeks, maybe 3, while the condo remediation was handled, just a guest room, quiet, clean, no disruption. Diane would of course make a small contribution toward utilities. She said contribution like it was a generous offer. I looked at the cookie box. I looked at Diane's smile. I thought about the fence board fine. And then, because I'm apparently someone who needs to learn lessons the hardest possible way, I said yes. I should have asked for it in writing. I should have defined temporary. I should have handed her the cookie box back and said I wasn't running a boarding house. Instead, Lorraine moved in the next day. 1 suitcase, 1 rolling cart with medications and toiletries, 1 framed photo of what I assume was a younger Diane. Lorraine was polite. Quiet, she made her own bed, kept the door closed, asked permission before using the kitchen. She was a model guest for exactly 9 days. On day 10, a second suitcase arrived. On day 15, Diane brought over a small television. On day 23, Lorraine mentioned she'd given Diane a spare key to my house so Diane could check on her when I wasn't home. I stood in my own kitchen processing that sentence. You gave Diane a key to my house? Lorraine blinked at me pleasantly. Well, yes, dear. In case of emergency, I didn't make a scene, I didn't raise my voice. I went upstairs, checked the guest room door, sure enough, new key on Lorraine's keychain sitting on the nightstand. I went back downstairs, texted Diane, we need to talk about the key situation. She responded 4 hours later, Nathan, mother needs security. This is temporary, let's not make it complicated. Let's not make it complicated, I wrote that in the green notebook. Day 23, key copied without permission. Temporary situation now includes unsupervised access to my home. 2 weeks became 4, 4 became 6. I sent a polite text asking for a timeline on the condo remediation. Diane replied that the mold situation was more extensive than originally thought and that she appreciated my flexibility during this difficult time. Flexibility. I wrote it down. Day 41. No timeline provided. Mold remediation ongoing. I started researching North Carolina tenant laws. That's when things got interesting. In North Carolina, if someone occupies a room in your home for more than 30 days, they can establish tenancy even without a lease. After 30 days, you can't just ask them to leave. You have to formally evict them, formal eviction, court process, legal notices, the whole thing. Lorraine had been in my guest room for 41 days. I called my buddy Marcus, a real estate attorney who handles landlord-tenant disputes. Marcus listened without interrupting, which is his way of telling you the situation is worse than you think. Nathan, he said slowly. Is there any written agreement, any documentation at all, just text messages? I said. Diane said 2 weeks, maybe 3, that was it. Marcus sighed. She's established tenancy. If you want her out, you need to go through formal eviction. How long does that take? 4 to 6 weeks if she doesn't contest. Longer if she does. And Marcus, she copied a key to my house without asking. That's separate, that's a criminal matter. Trespassing, unauthorized key duplication. You could file a police report. But the tenancy issue, that's civil. You need to start the eviction process now. I hung up, sat at my kitchen table and looked at the green notebook. 41 days, no lease, no agreement. Just a woman in my guest room who had somehow become a legal tenant with more rights to my house than I anticipated. I opened my laptop and started reading North Carolina General Statute 4226, Termination of Tenancy. I read it 3 times, then I started writing. The next morning, I hand-delivered a letter to Diane, formal, polite, typed on plain paper. It stated that Lorraine's temporary stay had exceeded the agreed timeframe and that I was providing 30 days' notice to vacate the guest room, 30 days from the date of the letter. I kept a copy. I took a photo of myself handing it to Diane at her front door, timestamp visible. Diane read it standing in her doorway, still in her bathrobe without the cardigan for once. She looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, not anger, calculation. Nathan, this is incredibly inappropriate. Mother is elderly, she's vulnerable, you agreed to help. I did help, for 41 days, now I need my space back. Diane folded the letter carefully. We'll discuss this at the next board meeting. This isn't a board matter, Diane, this is a private tenancy issue. Everything in Ridgemont Park is a board matter. She closed the door. I walked home, added the interaction to the green notebook. Day 42, 30-day notice delivered. Diane threatened board involvement. 3 days later, I received an email from the HOA board. Subject line, Community Standards Violation. The email stated that I was operating an unlicensed boarding house in violation of the community's residential use-only covenants. It cited Section 12 of the CCR's, residential properties shall not be used for commercial purposes including but not limited to rental of rooms or boarding arrangements. I was being fined $200 and required to cease all boarding activities immediately. I read it twice, then I laughed. Actually laughed. Alone in my kitchen with Biscuit looking at me like I'd lost it, because Diane had just made a spectacular mistake. If I was operating a boarding house, that meant Lorraine was a tenant. If Lorraine was a tenant, she owed rent. If she owed rent and hadn't paid, I had grounds for eviction based on non-payment. But more importantly, if the HOA was claiming I was violating residential use covenants by having Lorraine there, they were directly supporting my position that she needed to leave. Diane had just argued my case for me. I forwarded the email to Marcus with a single line. Does this help? He called me 6 minutes later. Nathan, this is beautiful. She just documented that Lorraine's presence violates community rules. Use this. File for eviction based on lease violation and non-payment. I've got template forms. We can have this filed by Monday. I wrote it in the green notebook, day 45. HOA fined me for boarding house violation. Diane documented her mother's tenancy violates CCRs. We filed the eviction on Monday. Unlawful detainer, non-payment of rent, violation of residential use covenants. Filing included copies of the text messages, the 30-day notice, the HOA violation email, and a signed affidavit from me stating that no rent had been paid and that the occupancy had exceeded the agreed temporary timeframe. The court date was set for 28 days out. The sheriff served Lorraine the notice at my house on a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't home. Biscuit was in the backyard. Lorraine accepted service, signed for it, and according to the sheriff's return of service, remained polite throughout. Diane called me 17 minutes later. You're evicting my mother. Her voice was tight, controlled, but tight. I'm reclaiming my guest room, Diane. You were given notice. She's 81 years old. She's also a tenant who hasn't paid rent and whose presence violates the HOA's own residential use covenants. You sent me that email yourself. There was silence, long enough that I thought she'd hung up. Then she said very quietly, you're going to regret this, Nathan, and she hung up. I wrote it down. Day 51, eviction served. Diane made verbal threat, regret this. The next HOA board meeting was the following week. I didn't plan to attend. I hadn't attended a board meeting in 4 years. But Gary Mendoza, a neighbor 2 streets over, retired postal supervisor, called me the night before. Nathan, you should come tomorrow. Diane's putting you on the agenda. For what? She's proposing a special assessment against your property for legal fees related to community standards enforcement. How much? $1,200. I was quiet for a moment. She's charging me for the cost of fighting my eviction? Gary's voice was careful. She's not calling it that. She's calling it enforcement of residential use violations. But yeah, that's what it is. I'll be there. The meeting was in the clubhouse. 32 people showed up. That's more than double the usual attendance. Word had spread. Diane ran the meeting from the head table, cardigan in place, voice steady. When the agenda reached new business, she introduced the special assessment proposal. She explained that a homeowner, unnamed but obviously me, was flagrantly violating community standards by operating a commercial boarding arrangement. She said the HOA had incurred legal consultation fees to address the matter and that those fees should be borne by the violating homeowner. She moved for a vote. I stood up. Diane paused. Nathan, public comment is at the end. This is a vote on a financial matter that directly affects me. I'm entitled to speak before the vote. She looked at the board attorney, a younger guy named Phil who always looked like he wished he was somewhere else. Phil nodded reluctantly. Diane gestured, fine, 2 minutes. I didn't need 2 minutes. I needed 40 seconds. I explained that Lorraine Kellerman, Diane's mother, had been living in my guest room for 58 days without paying rent. That Diane herself had issued me a violation notice for operating a boarding house. That I had filed for eviction to comply with the HOA's own residential use standards. And that charging me legal fees for enforcing the very standards Diane had cited against me was retaliatory and probably illegal. I sat down. The room was completely silent. Diane's face didn't change, but her hands, folded on the table in front of her, tightened just slightly. Phil, the board attorney, cleared his throat. Diane, I think we need to table this. We should discuss it in executive session. Diane's voice was ice. I moved to table pending further review. The 3 rubber-stamp board members voted to table. Gary Mendoza, the 4th member, abstained. The meeting continued. I left early. But Gary called me that night. She's rattled, Nathan. I've been on this board for 3 years. I've never seen her rattled. Good, I said, and I meant it. The eviction hearing was on a Thursday morning. County Courthouse, 3rd floor, Small Claims Division. Lorraine showed up with Diane. Diane was wearing a blazer this time, no cardigan. This was serious. Marcus represented me. Lorraine did not have an attorney. The hearing took 14 minutes. The judge, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, reviewed the filing, the text messages, the 30-day notice, the HOA email. She asked Lorraine directly, Ms. Kellerman, did you pay rent for the room? No, Your Honor. It was a temporary family arrangement. The judge looked at Diane. And you are her daughter. I arranged the stay. Did you have a written agreement with Mr. Cross? No, Your Honor. It was verbal. 2 weeks, maybe 3. The judge looked back at the file. It's been 58 days. Yes, Your Honor. The mold remediation took longer than expected. The judge removed her glasses. Ms. Kellerman, you've been residing in Mr. Cross's home for nearly 2 months without a lease and without paying rent. Mr. Cross has provided proper notice. I'm granting the eviction. You have 10 days to vacate. Lorraine nodded quietly. Diane's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. We left the courtroom. Marcus shook my hand in the hallway. Clean win. She can't appeal this. It's done. I drove home, let biscuit out, made coffee, and sat in the living room. 10 days. I wrote it in the green notebook. Day 64. Eviction granted. 10 days to vacate. Lorraine moved out on day 8. Quiet, polite, no drama. She packed her suitcases, her television, her framed photo. Diane came with a truck. They didn't speak to me. I watched from the kitchen window as they loaded everything and drove away. When they were gone, I went upstairs. The guest room was clean, bed made, no damage, nothing left behind except a handwritten note on the nightstand. Nathan, I'm sorry this became complicated. Thank you for your patience. Lorraine. I stood there holding the note for a long moment. Then I folded it and put it in the green notebook. She wasn't the problem. She never was. 2 weeks later, Diane resigned from the HOA board. She sent an email to all homeowners. Brief, formal, cited personal family matters and the need to step back from community leadership. She didn't mention me. She didn't mention the eviction. She just left. Gary Mendoza was elected interim president. His first act was to rescind the $200 boarding house fine against me. His second was to eliminate special assessments for legal fees unless approved by a 2/3 vote of all homeowners, not just the board. Small changes, real ones. The kind that make a community function like one instead of a fiefdom. The guest room stayed empty for 4 months. Then my brother came through town and stayed for a weekend. We grilled burgers, watched a game, didn't talk about anything important. It was perfect. When he left, I stripped the bed, washed the sheets, and made it up fresh. The room smelled like laundry, detergent, and nothing else. Clean, neutral, ready. That spring, Gary suggested something at a neighborhood cookout, a community skill share, neighbors teaching neighbors useful things, basic home repair, cooking, gardening, financial literacy, rotating houses, voluntary, no HOA involvement unless people wanted to formalize it later. The first session drew 6 people. The second drew 11. By summer, we had a regular schedule. It met in different garages and backyards. It smelled like charcoal and fresh-cut grass and the particular kind of easy conversation that happens when people are working with their hands. Someone suggested we start a small fund for neighbors who needed help with emergency repairs. People chipped in, $50 here, 20 there. By the end of the year, we had enough to replace a water heater for an elderly couple on a fixed income and to help a single mom fix a busted air conditioner in August. We called it the Ridgemont Neighbor Fund. Simple, direct, it worked. At Gary's suggestion, we added a small scholarship, $500, awarded to a local high school senior pursuing any post-secondary education or trade certification. The first recipient was a kid named Jordan who wanted to be a welder. I shook his hand at the presentation and thought about the green notebook in my filing cabinet at home. Still there, still full, still worth keeping. 1 eviction notice, 10 days to vacate, 72 days of someone else living in my guest room because I said yes to a cookie box and a cardigan smile. But here's what I want you to remember. Diane assumed I wouldn't bother. She assumed I'd be uncomfortable, that I'd let it slide, that I'd accept the situation because confrontation is hard and eviction sounds extreme. She was wrong. The moment you write it down, the power shifts. The moment you know the statute number, the timeline, the process, you're not a victim of someone else's entitlement. You're a homeowner enforcing your rights. Marcus didn't win that case. I won it. I won it the day I started keeping the green notebook. I won it the day I read North Carolina General Statute 4226. I won it the day I stopped assuming that being polite meant being passive. Lorraine was fine. She moved into a senior community 3 miles away. I saw her at the grocery store once. She smiled, waved, kept walking. No hard feelings. Diane, on the other hand, sold her house 8 months later, moved to a different development across town. I heard she joined their HOA board within 6 weeks. Some people never learn. But some do. Gary's still board president. The Ridgemont Neighbor Fund is still running. The skill share still happen, and my guest room is still just a guest room. Clean sheets, decent mattress, neutral paint. Empty 11 months a year. That's exactly how it should be. Drop your HOA story below. Subscribe if you want the next one. Know your rights. Write it down. The notebook always wins.